Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith, Pennsylvania editor for the Center Square. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Anthony Hennon. We spend a lot of time here exploring the reasons why Pennsylvania's rural communities are shrinking. The conventional wisdom has been in the last couple of years that young people leave in search of better economic opportunity elsewhere. But Anthony, as you found out, there's the workforce shortage that we are seeing in these rural areas is really more of a symptom of the problem and not the cause. I mean, from housing to transportation to childcare or lack thereof, people living in these places simply can't meet the basic requirements to keep a job, right?
Yeah, so I think some of these patterns you see regardless of where you are, urban, suburban, rural. But it seems like in a lot of these cases, it's more intensified in urban areas. So, of course, there's issues of growing the economy, establishing businesses, having jobs available. But at the same time, there's a lot of different headaches here. Childcare and transportation tend to stand out. Either, childcare is getting more expensive to offer, or some people having issues with either their car being reliable, with being able to, use any sort of public transit, because if you're in a rural area, that's much more spotty, or it's just longer driving distances. So even if you can get a job, you might be on the road for an hour or more. And so it becomes a question of whether it's even worth the effort with all the other costs of childcare, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one big issue here. And I think one of the fundamental points that was made by the Department of Labor and Industries, Dan Cuba, says that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to meeting the needs of Pennsylvania workers and employers. So, there's not really just one simple magic button we can push or silver bullet that can really fix a lot of these things. A lot of this is going to be dependent on what part of the state you're in, what your part is like, and how you can structure these policies. Of course, another long-running issue and something that seems to come up in a lot of different hearings in the General Assembly today is broadband internet and building out better access. That's really crucial if you're an area where you're trying to attract remote workers or more flexible workers, because even if in some of these rural areas, even if you could work 3-4 days a week from home, if you don't have the internet infrastructure in place, you can't really do it practically and you have to go in. But another thing here is just the fundamental issue of not a lot of housing being available. And so you see a lot of people leaving even growing areas. I mean, in this talk earlier this week with the Senate Majority Policy Committee, they're talking about Williamsport. Williamsport is relatively booming, but as Jason Fink of the Williamsport-Lycoming Chamber of Commerce said, one of the key things that we're lacking is housing. Historically, during this time of year, you would expect to see in the neighborhood of 700 to 800 homes on the market. But right now, there's only about 125 to 150 homes up for sale. So there's this big issue of housing availability and affordable housing, even buying market rate housing for affordable housing. There's just not as much growth going on. And a lot of the issues here can just be the high cost of building this housing in the first place, be it from permitting, from time delays, everything else. What's interesting here is when we're hearing from senators such as Dan Laughlin of Erie, who before he was in the Senate, he was involved with home building. And he describes a lot of these problems with housing as the hamster wheel of red tape. He said, "It seems like every time I turn around, there's a new regulation that is preventing people from just doing their job and building houses that people can afford. Then we have to have hearings where we go, what are we going to do about housing affordability? I don't know. Quit handcuffing the people that are actually doing it." So, I think there's a few different layers here. And it's not always just a question of having enough jobs available, but just the entire, structure of rural areas in Pennsylvania and finding ways to do things we used to do quickly, now we can't do anymore. And finding policy solutions to that, be it on the state level or on the local level, is becoming harder and harder.
Senator Laughlin also had some interesting comments about the other issue that people who are low income in these rural areas struggle with, which is the benefits cliff. We spend a lot of time reporting on that, especially how it's changing post-pandemic. But I think one of the things that our listeners may not understand about the benefits cliff is that a lot of people trapped in these poverty cycles, they're kind of caught in this limbo where, yes, they want to seek out higher paying jobs or even take promotions at the jobs that they're in. But if they do so, they will lose some of the safety net benefits that help them afford to live now. And so they will not make enough money to, say, feed their family comfortably or to continue or to keep the affordable housing that they have, because they will suddenly lose eligibility. So that also kind of keeps people trapped in this cycle, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's It's basically a rational trade-off here. If you get this promotion, then you lose more benefits than you actually gain from the promotion. And so people avoid that, or people might avoid switching from part-time to full-time work. And this can be a state issue, but this is also a federal issue with different funding programs. So finding out how to change that is very crucial, I think, when we're talking about maybe either younger people or working people trying to get out of poverty or find more of an economic foothold, of removing these barriers or these weird incentives that actually punish you for taking advantage of an opportunity. So I think that's a big issue that gets overlooked a lot in a lot of different ways.
Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Anthony Hennon, this is Kristen Smith. Please subscribe and thanks for listening.